all of them. But the problem here is really white has 9 moves, and black only has 4 pieces. And so Galvin finds really a phenomenal 9, really an amazing series. King f3, a3, a takes b4, b3, knight e2, knight takes f4, knight h3, rook takes a1, rook takes a7 check. And b3 is even really kind of nice here, preventing the king from coming in, making it harder for him to eat both pawns with his knight. Pieces are really arranged optimally so that the knight will have to spend pretty much all of its 10 moves to capture him. The knight on h3 is pretty much as far away from the rook on a7 as is possible for a knight, and so black really doesn't have anything good here. He played king e6, king f5, knight c6, knight takes a7. He has 6 moves left. Knight c8, knight b6, 4 moves left. Knight takes a8, knight b6, 2 moves left. h6, e4 check. And this is kind of interesting, but the problem is white has 11 moves, and that's enough to win, scrape by with the minimal list of wins. King e3, knight takes e4, knight c3, knight a4, knight takes b6. He has 5 moves left, and he plays knight a4, knight c3, knight e2, king f3, and now an example of blocking. The h pawn needs to be stopped from promoting, which is easy to do with the simple h3, and we now notice that the knight on e2 covers the entry squares d4 and c3. The king on f3 keeps the king from coming in this way. h3 blocks the h pawn from promoting, and the g pawn can't promote because of check. And so this was just a very well played game, aside from probably a bad 3 and 5, but that's more no problem of not knowing opening theory. But the rest of the game was extremely well played from white. Okay, next I'm going to show an example from one of my own games against the Hungarian player Zoltán Blachik from the 1998 Fischer Random Championship. And this is really probably the finest example of blocking that I can think of from a progressive chess game, so I'm proud of it. I'm going to show it off here. White plays c4, f5, g5. White goes f4, f takes g5, knight d3. One of the common traits of these Fischer Random positions is they're often a little more awkward than regular chess, and it leads to more creative, interesting play. I really think that Fischer Random is the ideal way to play this game, especially because theory plays such an important role. And if you know the series in the starting position, then the rest of the game can become rather trivial, where both sides are just going down some line that they already know and they can't avoid it because they would lose. So here, black played bishop takes b2, bishop takes a1, getting the queens off, c5, d6, which avoids checkmate. And now white actually plays an interesting series. g3, bishop takes b7, bishop takes a8, also getting the queens off. And king c2, king b3. And what made this series so dangerous is that white's rooks are now extremely active. Every try I started analyzing here, it just seemed like he was just playing rook takes something on f8. Even if I took his f1 rook, it would be the c1 rook. Then that would be, and I couldn't find a way to take them both without getting checkmated. So it was always just something coming in on the f file and just wiping out all my pieces. And then he was in a position to win on his 9. But then I found this series, bishop d5, bishop takes a8, which isn't really, it didn't seem like this bishop was that menacing, but I wanted to take something on this series and then execute my main idea, which is simply to block the f-file. So this is a very almost Karpov-like series, I think, and works very well. e5, king e7, king f7, knight c6. And this violates a lot of the rules I've already said, like don't put your king in front of a rook because you might get ghosted, but there's no way his king way over here on b3 could possibly get to the f-file in 7 moves, and deliver check. So the king is actually perfectly safe in front of the rook here, and in fact, it blocks all of his main ideas. The king is not getting checkmated here. Even though white has 2 rooks, he has no way to get either of them into the game and effective. It takes 3 moves to get this rook even on the b file, and then he would only have 4 left. And he simply can't play rook takes f5 because it would deliver check. So this is a case of using the king of all things as a blocking piece, and also this qualifies as what I call check defense, which is stopping the idea of the opponent because it would deliver check. We've seen this before in the game I played against Forzoni with the harassing check, where bishop takes g. If he played knight takes g4 on the first move, it would have delivered check, and we've seen it in plenty of other cases where one side simply can't take the opponent's pieces because the king guards them with check. So in this case, white decided to use the e-file: rook f3, rook e3, rook e5, rook e8, rook c8, rook a8, rook f8. But this the problem with such greedy series like this is I had looked at this series already because it was the obvious. I tried to eat all the material, and the king on b3 is just not in the ideal spot. f4, f3, f takes e2, e1 queen, queen takes d2, knight b4, queen takes a2, mate, which almost looks like a checkmate from a real Sicilian game or something. And yeah, so this is a nice example of blocking in action. Another example of blocking being used to good effect. This is the game from the preliminaries of the 1998 championship, Brian Williams versus Jori Ostrowski. I'll just go through the moves quickly because most of this game was not particularly good, but get to the series that is interesting. d3, d takes e4, knight h3, bishop g5, king d2, knight h7, knight takes g5, e5, bishop a3, bishop takes b2, bishop takes a1, knight takes g5, bishop b5, bishop takes c6, knight a3, rook takes a1, bishop d5, knight takes f7 check. Now black played a very good series. It actually doesn't look like black is doing that well here. He's down 4 pieces to 2. But he has 2 rooks, and 2 rooks can do a lot of damage. Well, 1 rook even can do a lot of damage, and then even when it gets taken, white then has to deal with the second rook. So in this case, black found a very good 8. King d7, rook f8, rook takes f7, rook f3, rook takes a3, rook takes a2, rook takes a1, and now this becomes a spare move problem. What is the best move here for black? He has 1 move left, so if you want to try to figure that out, and I'll give the answer in a bit. So this is both an example of a spare move that we talked about earlier and being used for blocking, and h4 is actually a very good move here. The main reason is that it delays white's promotion by 1 move, because on h5 the pawn would have to go g4, it could get there in 5 moves, g4, gh, h6, hg, g8, queen a, queen a7, queen a1, and in this position he can't even do that. If he plays g4 he can't promote, the h-pawn cannot promote, and so he's left with having to promote the f-pawn. Which is not so yeah, he'd have to promote with the f-pawn here, which is not ideal because it leaves the h-pawn free to counter-promote. So that's the main idea with this series, is that it stops the promotion that white wanted to do, which was to eat both of black's pawns, come over and play queen a1, queen a7, queen a1, and then something like king c3, which would have been 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 moves. He would have stopped everything, and then black wouldn't have had a promotion. But here, if he tries that, f4, f5, f6, fg, blah blah blah, queen a7, queen a1, he doesn't have a way to stop both the b pawn and the h pawn, because he could play like bishop takes b7 to stop the b pawn, or king c3, or he could play h3, but he only has 1 move left. Another quick example of blocking from the game Blachik Sokola, e4, knight c6, d5. This is also another 1998 game, king takes d8, de. You could see this series was incredibly popular, even though it's not very good. d3, d takes e4, bishop g5. Again, this series king d2, knight h3, which is not the best. E5, bishop e7, knight g4, knight takes f2, knight takes h1, bishop takes g5 check. Now white finds a very good series here. The first thing is that he decides what material he actually wants to eat, namely the bishop on g5, the rook on a8, and the knight on c6. Can be eaten in a mere 5 moves, leaving black with only 2 pieces. But then there's the question of, well, what's the next best moves? Bishop is actually well placed on c6 in the sense that it puts the king in a net, so it has to be dealt with. And it also blocks the line of the rook, so this is an example of blocking where literally just throwing a piece there where it makes it harder for him to get through. The downside is if he can come through and eat this and has enough moves, you've just given him a free piece. That might not have been the case on a8. But now we see that black's main white has pretty much calculated that black cannot beat him with the rook and the knight. But he is aware that black could win if he could promote one of his pawns. So he simply uses his 2 spare moves to block both of the promotable pawns, knight a3, and also rook g1. And we've seen this idea before, where this is also an example of scattering, where the rook is actually better placed on g1 than it would have been on a1, and this is a case of blocking the capture, h4, h3, h takes g2, and then the pawn has nowhere to go because the rook is in its path, and we can see that this isn't the rook is not optimally scattered here compared to the knight. I mean, this does allow series like knight f2, h3, g1, h3, g5, but that's not really that scary. Black only has 8 moves, and this would only take the rook and the knight in 4, and then he would still have to deal with this, and then there'd still be promotable pawns, so it's just too much for black to deal with, and so he resigned in this position. Okay, so for the last part of this video, which is getting very long, it's going to be 3 parts on YouTube, it looks like, I'm going to talk about check defense. Check defense and building a fortress. This also has to do with in-game concepts, but it's also relevant in the middle stages of the game on the 5s